What happens when the most powerful mafia boss in the city divorces his wife on their wedding night? Not for love, but for strategy? Lena Marlowe believed marrying Dante Rizzo meant protection. Instead, she woke up discarded, invisible, and marked for disposal. But the woman they threw away wasn't weak. She was underestimated. This is the story of how a bride became a kingmaker, how silence became power, and how the man who cast her out learned too late that some women don't break. They rebuild empires. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The Palazzo Nero had hosted 3 generations of weddings, each one a calculated merger disguised as romance. Tonight, beneath crystal chandeliers that refracted light like fractured diamonds, Lena Marlowe walked down an aisle flanked by men whose smiles never reached their eyes. The guests weren't there to celebrate. They were there to witness a transaction, to confirm that Dante Rizzo had secured another asset, another alliance sealed in white lace and champagne toasts. Lena's dress cost more than most people earned in a year, custom-fitted Italian silk that moved like water against her skin. Her mother had cried during the final fitting, though whether from joy or fear, Lena couldn't say. The Marlowe family had fallen from grace years ago, their legitimate shipping business gutted by competition and bad investments until they existed in that dangerous gray space, too proud to disappear, too broke to matter. When Dante Rizzo's people approached with a proposal, her father had called it salvation. Lena had called it survival. She studied Dante at the altar, his profile sharp as cut glass, his posture rigid with the kind of control that came from years of making people disappear for showing weakness. He was 38 to her 26, handsome in the way of men who never doubted their own power. Dark hair swept back from a face that photographers loved and rivals feared. His suit was bespoke, charcoal with subtle pinstripes that whispered money and menace in equal measure. When he took her hand for the vows, his grip was firm but impersonal, like shaking hands to close a business deal. "I do," Dante said, his voice carrying across the cathedral with practiced authority. Lena's turn. The priest waited. 300 guests waited. Armed men positioned at every exit waited. She felt the weight of her family's debt, her father's desperation, her own shrinking options pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. "I do," she whispered. The kiss was brief, performative. His lips touched hers with all the warmth of a signature on a contract. Then he turned to face the crowd, her hand trapped in his, and the room erupted in applause that sounded more like a business convention than a celebration of love. The reception blurred a past in a parade of strangers, offering congratulations that felt like condolences. Lena smiled until her face ached, accepted kisses on her cheek from men who smelled of expensive cologne and barely concealed violence. Women in designer gowns assessed her with calculating eyes, measuring her worth, her threat level, her likelihood of survival in a world where wives were both protected and imprisoned. Dante moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, accepting embraces, his attention everywhere except on his new bride. Lena found herself standing alone near the champagne fountain, watching her husband work the room with the efficiency of a man ticking items off a checklist. "Beautiful ceremony," a voice said beside her. Lena turned to find an older woman in emerald silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She had the kind of face that had been stunning once and remained arresting now, all sharp cheekbones and knowing eyes. "Thank you," Lena managed. "I'm Carmine Voss. I knew Dante's mother." The woman's smile held secrets. She was lovely, too. Hopeful, like you, for about 6 months. Something cold slithered down Lena's spine. What happened after 6 months? Carmine's expression shifted to something like pity. She learned what we all learn eventually. The Rizzo men don't marry for love. They marry for leverage. She touched Lena's arm, a brief pressure of warning. "Remember that when the performance ends. You're not his wife. You're his insurance policy." Before Lena could respond, Carmine disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind the scent of Chanel and the taste of dread. The evening wore on. Dinner was 7 courses of food Lena couldn't taste, accompanied by speeches that praised Dante's vision, his leadership, his strategic brilliance. No one mentioned her except as an acquisition, A beautiful addition to the Rizzo legacy, perfect complement to Dante's empire, exactly what the family needed. Around midnight, Dante appeared at her side. Time to go. He didn't offer his hand, just turned and walked toward the exit, expecting her to follow. Lena gathered the train of her dress and moved through the gauntlet of guests, their faces blurring into a mass of expensive makeup and knowing smiles. Outside, a black SUV waited, flanked by two sedans filled with security. The door opened. Dante climbed in without looking back. Lena followed. They didn't speak during the drive. The city slid past the tinted windows, late-night diners, closed storefronts, the illuminated skyline that always made the streets below seem darker by comparison. Dante stared at his phone, typing messages with mechanical precision. Lena watched the bodyguards in the front seat, noting how they never fully relaxed, how their eyes constantly scanned the streets for threats. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Obsidian Tower, Dante's crown jewel in a portfolio of strategic real estate. The elevator required a keycard and retinal scan. As they ascended, Lena felt the air pressure change, felt the distance growing between her and any possible escape route. The doors opened onto what should have been paradise. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting, furniture that belonged in museums, a bedroom prepared by someone's idea of romance, rose petals scattered across white silk sheets, champagne chilling in a silver bucket, soft lighting that should have felt intimate but instead felt staged. Dante walked straight to the windows, his back to her, his phone still in his hand. Lena stood in the center of the room in her wedding dress, unsure what script she was supposed to follow. Should I change? If you want. His tone suggested it didn't matter to him either way. She found her luggage in the massive walk-in closet, her clothes looking cheap and out of place among the designer suits and Italian shoes. She changed into a simple silk nightgown, washed off the makeup, let down her hair. When she returned to the bedroom, Dante was still at the window, but he'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie. Dante? Her voice sounded small in the huge room. He turned. For a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Not desire, not affection. Assessment. Like he was calculating the value of inventory. Sit down, Lena. She perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap like a child called to the principal's office. Dante poured himself whiskey from the bar, didn't offer her any. He took a long drink, then set the glass down with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a gunshot. I'm going to be direct because that's efficient and I value efficiency. He crossed his arms, standing 6 feet away like he was about to negotiate a merger. I want a divorce. The words didn't make sense. Lena's brain scrambled to process them, to find the joke, the test, the hidden meaning. What? A divorce. Immediately. My lawyers have prepared the papers. He gestured toward the desk where a manila envelope sat like a landmine. Everything you need is there. But Lena stood, her legs unsteady. We've been married for 6 hours. Yes, and that was 6 hours too long, but appearances required the ceremony. Dante's voice remained calm, professional, like he was explaining a failed business venture. You'll be compensated generously. Full settlement, protection, a monthly allowance that exceeds what your family could earn in a decade. You'll sign a comprehensive NDA, of course. I don't understand. Lena's voice cracked. Why marry me at all? Your family's shipping connections provided access I needed to consolidate the eastern ports. The wedding demonstrated stability to certain partners who value tradition. You served a purpose. That purpose is now complete. He said it like he was explaining why he'd replaced a broken tool. You used me. I used a situation that benefited both parties. Your family's debts are cleared. Your father can retire without fear. Your sister can attend that college in Switzerland she wanted. You get financial security for life. Dante ticked off the benefits like a grocery list. In exchange, you'll disappear quietly. That's the arrangement. Lena felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, which had never been involved in this transaction, but something deeper. Her sense of herself as a person capable of making choices, of having agency in her own life. And if I refuse? Dante's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You won't refuse, because you're smart enough to understand that refusal isn't actually an option you possess. A knock at the door. Dante called out permission to enter. Two men in dark suits stepped inside. Not the same security from the wedding, but specialists. The kind who made problems disappear efficiently. These gentlemen will escort you to temporary accommodations while the paperwork is finalized. You'll have everything you need: a car, credit cards, protection. Dante collected his phone, his jacket. The apartment is clean, untraceable. You'll stay there until the divorce is processed. Then you'll relocate to wherever you choose, provided it's not this city. You're exiling me. The reality settled over Lena like ice water. On our wedding night, you're throwing me away. I'm offering you a future. That's more than most people in your position receive. Dante moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, this was never personal. You seem like a decent person. That's actually why I chose you. You were unlikely to cause complications. Unlike who? Lena's mind suddenly clicked several pieces together. You said you loved someone else. Who? Dante's jaw tightened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him all night. That's not your concern. I think I'm entitled to know who I was rejected for before the honeymoon even started. He studied her for a long moment, some calculation happening behind his dark eyes. Finally, he shrugged. Veronica Saint Laurent. We've been involved for 2 years. She's Alejandro Saint Laurent's daughter, French-Algerian syndicate with major influence in international arms and pharmaceutical logistics. A marriage between us would have united 2 empires. Then why not marry her? Her father wouldn't allow it. Too much risk, too much concentrated power. He demanded I prove stability first, demonstrate I could honor tradition, and manage alliances through conventional channels. Dante's expression turned bitter. So I married you. Showed him I could follow protocol. Now I'll divorce you. Approach him again with proof that I'm willing to sacrifice personal desire for strategic necessity. He'll respect that. He'll approve the marriage. Lena felt like she was watching a chess game where she'd just discovered she wasn't a player. She was a pawn being sacrificed in the opening moves. So I was a demonstration. Proof you could go through the motions. Proof I could make difficult choices for the greater good of the organization. Dante checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to collect anything personal. Everything else stays here. The 2 security specialists moved closer, not threatening yet, but ready. Lena looked at the rose petals, the champagne, the staged romance that had never been meant for her. She thought about her family celebrating downstairs at the reception, believing she was safe, protected, ascending to a better life. She thought about Carmine Voss's warning. You're not his wife. You're his insurance policy. And insurance policies had expiration dates. I'll need my phone, Lena said quietly. New phone. Untraceable. Already in the car. Dante opened the door wider. Your family will be told you're honeymooning in Europe. By the time you resurface, the divorce will be final and the story will be irreconcilable differences. Happens all the time in our world. No one will question it. Lena walked to the closet, pulled on jeans and a sweater over the nightgown, grabbed her mother's necklace from the jewelry box. That was all she took. The wedding dress could stay as evidence of the farce. She turned back to find Dante watching her with something that might have been respect or might have been relief that she wasn't making this difficult. The guards downstairs, Lena said. The ones at the wedding. They weren't there to protect me, were they? They were there to ensure the event proceeded smoothly. Now they'll ensure your transition proceeds smoothly. Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled slightly. A message from Veronica, probably. Time to go. The specialists escorted Lena to the private elevator. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of Dante returning to the window. The city spread before him like a kingdom he'd defended by throwing away a queen he'd never wanted. The ride down felt longer than the ascent. The men didn't speak, didn't look at her. Professional courtesy masking the fact that she was cargo now, not a person. The car waited in the underground garage, another black SUV with tinted windows. They opened the rear door. Lena climbed inside. The interior was leather and expensive technology. A new iPhone sat in the cup holder, preloaded with a single contact. Coordinator. A wallet contained credit cards in her name and $5,000 cash. A folder held keys and an address in a neighborhood Lena didn't recognize. Buckle up, the driver said. His first words to her. They drove through streets empty of everything except patrol cars and late-night delivery trucks. Lena watched the city she'd thought would become her kingdom turn into a maze of exits she'd never be allowed to take. Her phone buzzed, the old one, still in her jeans pocket. Texts from her mother, her sister, asking how the night was going, if she was happy, if Dante was everything they'd hoped. Lena turned off the phone. Let them keep their happiness a little longer. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The apartment was in a mid-rise building that looked maintained but anonymous. 4th floor, corner unit. The specialist walked her up, checked the rooms with practiced efficiency, looking for bugs, cameras, threats, finding nothing because Dante's people had already swept it clean. You'll stay here until notified otherwise, the taller one said. Order food through the apps. Don't use your real name. Don't contact anyone from your previous life. Don't leave the building without approval. How long? Lena asked. Until the paperwork clears. 2 weeks, maybe 3. He handed her a card with a phone number. Emergencies only. Medical or security threats. Nothing else. They left. The door locked with a heavy click that sounded like a prison cell closing. Lena stood in the center of the living room, tasteful furniture, generic art, the kind of space designed to be forgettable, a place where people disappeared. She walked to the window. 4th floor wasn't high enough to see much, just the building across the street, a narrow slice of sky losing its stars to approaching dawn. Somewhere in this city, Dante was probably messaging Veronica, telling her Phase 1 was complete. Somewhere her family was sleeping peacefully, believing their daughter had married into safety. Somewhere Lena Marlowe had existed as a person with choices and a future. That person felt very far away now. She sat on the couch as the sky lightened, still wearing her jeans over her wedding nightgown, her mother's necklace cold against her skin. The champagne from the penthouse would be going flat now. The rose petals would be wilting. The marriage certificate was probably already filed away in some lawyer's office, marked for dissolution before the ink fully dried. Carmine Voss had been wrong about one thing. The performance hadn't ended. It had barely begun. Because Lena was starting to understand that being discarded on your wedding night by a mafia boss wasn't the end of a story. It was the opening of a much darker one. The question was whether she'd survive it, whether she'd learn to play the game, or whether she'd remain a piece on someone else's board, moved and sacrificed at their convenience. Dawn broke fully, spilling weak light across the anonymous apartment. Lena stood, walked to the kitchen, found coffee and bread. Her hands didn't shake as she made breakfast. Her eyes were dry. That surprised her. She'd expected tears, rage, the kind of breakdown that seemed appropriate for a woman thrown away on her wedding night. Instead, she felt something colder settling into her bones. Not grief. Clarity. Dante had made a critical error. He'd assumed she was weak because she'd been desperate. He'd assumed she'd accept this exile gratefully because the alternative was her family's ruin. He'd assumed he could use her and discard her without consequence, because that's what men like him did to women like her. He'd assumed wrong. Lena didn't know yet what she'd do with this clarity, this cold fury that felt more dangerous than hot rage. But she knew one thing. The woman who'd walked down that aisle 6 hours ago had believed in salvation through surrender. The woman standing in this kitchen, drinking black coffee as the city woke up around her, understood that surrender was just another word for suicide. If Dante Rizzo wanted her to disappear, she'd disappear. But not the way he expected. Not quietly, not gratefully, not permanently. She'd disappear the way ghosts did, becoming invisible until the moment you haunted someone. And Dante Rizzo, she promised herself, was going to learn what it meant to be haunted by the woman he'd underestimated. The coffee was bitter, the bread was stale, the future was uncertain, but for the first time since her father had told her about Dante's proposal, Lena felt something other than resignation. She felt like she had nothing left to lose. And in Dante's world, people with nothing to lose were the most dangerous kind. The first week passed in a fog of enforced isolation. Lena learned the rhythms of the apartment building, the elderly couple in 4B who argued every morning at 7, the single mother in 4D whose kids thundered through the hallway after school, the mysterious tenant in 4F who she never saw but whose door opened and closed at irregular hours like clockwork designed by someone who didn't sleep. She ordered groceries through apps using the credit cards Dante had provided, each transaction a small reminder that even in exile, she was still on his payroll. The coordinator, whoever monitored that single contact in her phone, never called, never texted. The silence felt intentional, a demonstration that she'd been filed away and forgotten. On day 8, Lena stopped waiting for permission to exist. She started small, walks around the block at dawn when the streets belonged to joggers and delivery drivers. The neighborhood was working class, the kind of area where people minded their own business because everyone had something they didn't want examined too closely. She memorized the patterns, which corners the patrol cars favored, which alleys stayed empty, which storefronts changed hands frequently enough to suggest money laundering, or worse. She'd grown up adjacent to this world, after all. Her father's shipping business had operated in those gray spaces where legitimate commerce brushed against criminal enterprise. She'd learned to read the signs before she'd learned to drive, which handshakes meant deals, which conversations happened in parking lots instead of offices, which smiles hid threats. On day 12, the divorce papers arrived via courier. Lena signed them at the kitchen table with a pen that cost more than the furniture. The settlement was obscene, $2 million deposited into an account she could access once the decree was final, plus the monthly allowance, plus a trust that would pay out for the rest of her life. Blood money. Silence money. Money that said she'd never been a person, just an expense item being closed out. She signed anyway, took the courier's receipt, watched him disappear down the hallway. That night, she dreamed of the wedding. But in the dream, when Dante said he wanted a divorce, she laughed, told him she'd already known, told him she'd married him specifically to destroy him, woke up with her heart pounding and the taste of power on her tongue. The dream felt like a message from a version of herself that didn't exist yet but wanted to. On day 14, Lena did something reckless. She took the cash from the wallet, left the credit cards and the tracked phone in the apartment, and walked 12 blocks to a different neighborhood. Found a library, one of the old ones with marble steps and history in its bones. Inside, she used a public computer to search for information the way people used to before surveillance made privacy obsolete. She searched for Veronica Saint Laurent, found society page photos. A woman in her early 30s, striking rather than beautiful, with the kind of bone structure that suggested aristocratic bloodlines and the kind of eyes that suggested she'd gut you for looking at her wrong. Educated in Paris and London, fluent in 5 languages. Her father Alejandro controlled pharmaceutical logistics across 3 continents, which meant either legitimate medical supplies or the kind of drugs that funded revolutions. She searched for Dante's business holdings, discovered he owned 18 properties outright, held majority stakes in 6 restaurants that probably laundered money, controlled the board of a private security firm that provided consultation services to politicians and corporations. His net worth was estimated at $40 million, but that was just what showed on paper. The real number was probably triple that. She searched for Carmine Voss, found an obituary from 3 years ago. Heart attack, no suspicious circumstances. But in the photo, Carmine was younger, standing next to a man identified as Vincent Rizzo, Dante's father. The caption called her close family friend. The look in her eyes called her something else entirely. Lena cleared the browser history, logged out, walked back to the apartment. The whole excursion took 90 minutes. No one followed her. No one called to demand explanations. The coordinator's silence continued. Maybe they really had forgotten her. Maybe to them, she'd already ceased to exist. That night, Lena made a decision. If she was going to disappear, she'd do it on her own terms. Not hiding in this apartment waiting for permission to breathe, but vanishing into the city itself, becoming so invisible that when she finally chose to be seen again, it would be on her own terms. She needed work. Needed not the kind Dante's money could buy, but the kind that would teach her how this world actually operated, the kind that would put her inside the machine instead of underneath it. On day 17, Lena found her opening in the most unlikely place, the building's laundry room. She'd gone down at midnight, unable to sleep, hoping the mundane ritual of washing clothes would quiet her racing mind. The room was empty except for one other person, a woman around 40, professionally dressed despite the late hour, folding what looked like expensive shirts with practiced efficiency. Insomnia or emergency? The woman asked without looking up. Lena loaded her clothes into the machine. Both. I know that feeling. The woman smiled, tired but genuine. I'm Rachel Chen, 4th floor, Unit F, the mysterious neighbor. Up close, Rachel had the kind of face that was hard to age. Could be 35 or 50 depending on the light. Her clothes were designer but understated. Her manicure perfect. Her wedding ring modest. Everything about her said professional, competent, no time for nonsense. Lena. She didn't offer a last name. You moved in 2 weeks ago, alone. Rachel said it casually, but Lena heard the assessment underneath. Running from something or running towards something? The direct question caught Lena off guard. Most people pretended not to notice, not to care. Does it matter? Depends on which one. Running from something usually means you're scared. Running towards something means you're planning. Rachel finished folding, placed the shirts in a basket. In this neighborhood, planning is smarter than scared. Lena studied the woman more carefully. The expensive clothes, the late-night laundry, the way she talked like someone used to reading people quickly and accurately. What do? I facilitate solutions for people with complicated problems. Rachel's expression didn't change. Think of me as a consultant for situations that can't be addressed through traditional channels. A fixer. The city was full of them, people who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, solving problems for clients who needed discretion more than legitimacy. Some worked for crime families, some for politicians, some for corporations that needed issues handled quietly. Are you offering or recruiting? Lena asked. Neither, just making conversation with someone who looks like she's trying to figure out her next move. Rachel picked up her basket. But if you ever need advice on navigating complicated situations, I'm in 4F. My door's always unlocked between 6 and 7 a.m. That's when I do coffee and strategic planning. She left before Lena could respond. The dryer hummed. Lena stood alone in the fluorescent-lit laundry room, feeling like she'd just been given an invitation to something that could either save her or destroy her. At 6:15 the next morning, Lena knocked on apartment 4F. Rachel answered in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, coffee mug in hand. Prompt. I like that. She stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was identical in layout to Lena's, but utterly different in execution. Where hers was generic and forgettable, Rachel's was curated. Tasteful art that suggested real investment, furniture that balanced comfort with style, bookshelves full of volumes that looked read rather than decorative. A laptop sat open on the dining table, multiple windows displaying what looked like financial spreadsheets and encrypted messaging apps. Rachel gestured to the kitchen. Coffee's fresh, cream and sugar on the counter. We have 45 minutes before I need to leave for a meeting. Lena poured coffee, added cream, sat at the table. Rachel took the chair opposite, studying her with the kind of attention Lena was starting to recognize. The look of someone assessing value and threat simultaneously. So, Rachel said, tell me what you're running from. What makes you think I'm running? The way you move. Head down, shoulders tight, like you're trying not to be noticed. The cash-only purchases at the corner market. The fact that you're living in a building where half the tenants are here because they need to be invisible for a while. Rachel sipped her coffee. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I can spot someone in transition from 3 blocks away. Lena made a choice. Sometimes you had to trust someone or stay trapped forever. I got married 3 weeks ago. My husband divorced me on our wedding night and put me here until the paperwork clears. I'm supposed to disappear quietly after that. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or calculation? Dante Rizzo. It wasn't a question. Lena's heart hammered. How did you? Because I facilitate solutions for people with complicated problems, and Dante Rizzo is one of my clients. Rachel leaned back, her posture relaxed, but her gaze sharp. He didn't mention you specifically, but he did ask me to find a safe, discreet apartment for a short-term situation that required privacy. I arranged this building. I own it. Lena felt the floor tilt underneath her. She'd walked right into Dante's oversight, confessed everything to someone on his payroll. So you'll tell him I contacted you. Why would I do that? Rachel stood, refilled her coffee. Dante paid me to arrange housing. That contract ended when you moved in. What you do now is your business, not his. You don't owe him loyalty? I owe my clients discretion while they're paying for services. After that, I owe them nothing except the guarantee that I won't actively work against them without cause. Rachel returned to her seat. Dante Rizzo is a means to an end. He has connections I need, resources I occasionally leverage. But he's not my only client, not my most important client, and definitely not someone whose interests I prioritize over my own strategic goals. Lena tried to process this. What are your strategic goals? Right now, diversifying my client base and reducing dependence on volatile personalities. Dante's useful but unpredictable. He makes decisions based on ego and impulse, then expects people like me to clean up the mess. Rachel's smile turned sharp. Case in point, marrying you to prove a point to Alejandro Saint Laurent, then divorcing you immediately without considering the implications of having a discarded wife with nothing to lose walking around with insider knowledge. I don't have insider knowledge. I barely spoke to him. You have something more valuable. You have proof that Dante Rizzo's word means nothing, that he'll use people and throw them away for strategic convenience. That's reputation damage waiting to happen. Rachel gestured with her mug. Which brings me to why I'm having this conversation. You knocked on my door, which means you're not content to just disappear quietly. You want something. So let's skip the dance and get to the point. What do you want, Lena? The question hung in the air. Lena thought about the last 3 weeks, the humiliation, the exile, the way Dante had looked at her like she was a problem being solved rather than a person. She thought about her family, still believing she was living some fairy tale. She thought about Veronica Saint Laurent and the empire Dante was building by discarding women who inconvenienced him. I want to matter, Lena said quietly. I want to be more than something people use and throw away. Rachel studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, not kindly, but with a kind of recognition that felt more valuable than sympathy. Good. That's a goal I can work with. Revenge would have been messy. Validation is just strategy. So you'll help me? I'll give you information and opportunities. What you do with them is up to you. Rachel pulled her laptop closer, typed something. There's an organization called the Meridian Foundation. Charity work, community outreach, scholarship programs. Very wholesome public face. In reality, it's a front for syndicate money laundering and political influence. They hire administrative staff specifically to create legitimacy. People who don't ask questions, keep clean records, make everything look legal and proper. And you think they'd hire me? I think they need someone smart enough to manage complex systems but invisible enough not to attract attention. A woman from a good family fallen on hard times, grateful for the work, unlikely to cause problems. Rachel turned the laptop to show Lena a job posting. Administrative coordinator. Entry level, but with room for advancement if you prove competent. It's not glamorous, but it gets you inside. Lena read the posting. The salary was a fraction of what Dante's settlement would provide, but that wasn't the point. This was access. This was education. This was a way to learn how the machine worked from the inside. Who runs it? She asked. Officially, a board of directors full of retired politicians and philanthropists? Actually, a man named Silas Crown. He's 42, Harvard-educated, heir to old pharmaceutical money that he's been carefully transitioning into legitimate investments while maintaining strategic relationships with less legitimate enterprises. Rachel pulled up a photo. A man with dark hair going silver at the temples, sharp features, eyes that look like they missed nothing. He's reforming the organization, reducing risk, building real charitable infrastructure alongside the money laundering. Thinks he can have it both ways. Can he? That's what makes him interesting. Most people in this world are either corrupt or naive. Silas is neither. He's idealistic enough to want change and pragmatic enough to know it won't happen through conventional means. He's building something new, using dirty money to create clean outcomes, leveraging criminal connections to protect legitimate progress. Rachel closed the laptop. He's also exactly the kind of person who'd appreciate someone like you. Why? Because you're proof that the old model doesn't work. That using people like chess pieces creates collateral damage, and collateral damage has a way of becoming very expensive. Rachel stood. I'll make an introduction. But Lena, once you walk through that door, you're choosing a side. Not Dante's side, not necessarily mine, your own. Can you live with that? Lena thought about the alternative, taking Dante's money, disappearing to some other city, spending the rest of her life as a cautionary tale about women who reached too high and got burned. She thought about Carmine Voss, who tried to warn her and ended up dead of a heart attack at 53. Yes, she said, I can live with that. Rachel smiled. Good. Be at the Meridian Foundation offices tomorrow at 10 a.m. Dress professionally but not expensively. You're presenting as someone who needs the job, not someone with options. I'll have told Silas you're a referral from a mutual contact. The rest is up to you. Lena stood to leave, then paused. Why are you doing this? Because Dante Rizzo paid me to make you disappear, but he didn't pay me enough to make me care how you disappeared. And because women helping women succeed undermines the power structure that benefits men like him. That's not charity. That's strategy. Rachel walked her to the door. One more thing. The divorce papers you signed, those aren't final until a judge approves them. That process takes minimum 30 days, which means legally, you're still Mrs. Dante Rizzo. That gives you certain protections and certain vulnerabilities. Be aware of both. The door closed. Lena stood in the hallway, coffee still warm in her system, her future suddenly full of possibilities that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The next morning, she stood outside the Meridian Foundation headquarters, a brownstone in a historic district that had been converted into offices. The brass plaque by the door listed their mission: building bridges, creating opportunities, transforming communities. Inside, the reality would be messier. Money from drugs and weapons and human suffering sanitized through paperwork and good intentions. Lena checked her reflection in a storefront window. Simple navy dress, minimal makeup, her mother's necklace, her only jewelry. She looked like what she was supposed to be. A woman grateful for a chance, humble enough not to ask questions, desperate enough to be loyal. She pushed open the door. The interior was professional but not opulent. Clean lines, neutral colors, motivational posters about community impact. A receptionist looked up from her desk. Can I help you? I have an appointment with Mr. Crown, Lena Marlowe. The receptionist checked her computer, nodded. Third floor, corner office, elevators to your left. Lena rode up in an elevator that moved too slowly, giving her too much time to second-guess this decision. What did she know about working in a syndicate front operation? What made her think she could navigate these waters without drowning? Then she remembered Dante's face as he'd handed her divorce papers. Remembered the way he'd assessed her value and found it depleted. Remembered 3 weeks of enforced invisibility in an apartment paid for with guilt money. The elevator doors opened. She stepped into a hallway lined with photos of the foundation's work. Scholarships awarded, community centers built, families helped. Some of it was probably real. Some of it was probably theater. All of it was leverage. The corner office door was open. Inside, Silas Crown sat behind a desk covered in files and spreadsheets, phone pressed to his ear. He glanced up, held up one finger. Wait. Lena hovered in the doorway. I don't care what the logistics are, Marcus. Figure it out. We promise those grants by end of month. We deliver by end of month. Find the money. He hung up, stood, extended his hand. Lena, come in. Rachel speaks highly of you. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. Up close, he had the kind of face that photographs badly. Too angular, too intense. But in person, there was something compelling about the way he held himself. Confident without arrogance. Focused without coldness. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Crown. Silas, please. Mr. Crown was my father, and I spent 30 years trying not to become him. He gestured to a chair. Rachel said you have administrative experience and you're looking for meaningful work. Tell me about yourself. Lena had rehearsed this, truth layered with omission. I recently relocated here. My background is in logistics and operations. I helped manage my family's shipping business before it downsized. I'm looking for something stable where I can contribute to something larger than myself. Why the foundation specifically? Because I believe in the mission. I've seen what happens to communities when resources disappear, when opportunities vanish. If I can help bridge those gaps, that matters to me. Silas leaned back, studying her with those sharp eyes. Rachel also mentioned you understand discretion. That's critical here. We work with sensitive partnerships, complicated funding streams. Everyone who works here signs comprehensive NDAs and agrees to strict confidentiality protocols. Is that something you're comfortable with? Yes. Lena met his gaze. I understand that meaningful work often requires protecting information that could be misunderstood or misused if made public. Something shifted in Silas's expression, a flicker of approval, or maybe recognition. You're more politically sophisticated than most entry-level candidates. I've had good teachers. She thought of her father, negotiating with port authorities who took bribes. Her mother, smoothing over scandals with charity donations and strategic friendships. Dante, demonstrating that power came from understanding what people needed and using that need against them. Silas picked up a file from his desk. Our administrative coordinator manages grant applications, coordinates with community partners, handles correspondence and scheduling for board members. It's detailed work. Boring sometimes, but it's the foundation, pun intended, of everything else we do. If the paperwork fails, the mission fails. Understood? Understood. The salary is $45,000. Health insurance after 90 days, 2 weeks vacation, standard benefits package. He slid the file across the desk. But here's what I tell everyone before they accept a position here. This organization operates in complicated spaces. We take money from sources some people find objectionable and use it to create outcomes most people would support. That cognitive dissonance bothers some people. Does it bother you? Lena thought about how to answer. Honesty felt dangerous. Lies felt insulting. She chose something in between. I think the world is more complicated than good people and bad people. I think sometimes you have to work within systems you don't love to create changes you believe in. That doesn't bother me. It feels realistic. Silas smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. You and I are going to get along fine, Lena. When can you start? Tomorrow. Perfect. Emily at reception will handle your paperwork. Welcome to the Meridian Foundation. He stood, shook her hand again. One more thing. Rachel doesn't give referrals lightly. Whatever situation brought you here, whatever you're recovering from or running toward, I don't need to know the details. But I do need to know you're here because you want to be, not because you're hiding. Can you give me that? Lena thought about the question. Was she hiding, or was she building something new from the wreckage of who she'd been expected to become? I'm here because I want to matter, she said. Because I'm tired of being invisible and I'm ready to do the work to change that. Is that enough? It's honest. That's better than enough. Silas walked her to the door. See you tomorrow, Lena. She floated through the paperwork with Emily, signing forms and providing information from the fake identity documents Rachel had somehow procured. When she stepped back onto the street, the afternoon sun felt different, warmer, more welcoming. Like the city had decided she was allowed to exist in it after all. Her phone buzzed. The tracked one from the apartment. A message from the coordinator. Divorce finalized, settlement processed. You're free to relocate. Contact this number with forwarding address. Free. The word felt like a trap and a truth at the same time. Free to leave, to disappear, to become someone Dante never thought about again. Or free to stay, to build, to become someone he'd learned to regret underestimating. Lena deleted the message, turned off the phone, walked back to the apartment feeling like she'd just shed a skin she'd been forced to wear. In 4F, Rachel was probably tracking her progress, calculating the next move. In some penthouse across the city, Dante was probably celebrating his successful divorce, planning his approach to Alejandro Saint Laurent, imagining his future with Veronica. Neither of them were thinking about Lena Marlowe. That was fine. Let them forget her. Let her become invisible, irrelevant, dismissed. Because invisible people saw everything. Irrelevant people heard every secret. And dismissed women had nothing to prove and therefore nothing holding them back. Tomorrow she'd start at the Meridian Foundation. She'd file paperwork and answer phones and learn how money moved through organizations designed to hide its origins. She'd watch Silas Crown try to reform a corrupt system from the inside. She'd become exactly what Rachel said, someone inside the machine, understanding how it worked. And then when the moment was right, she'd decide what to do with that understanding. Dante had taught her an important lesson on their wedding night. In his world, people were either assets or liabilities. He'd decided she was neither, too insignificant to matter. He was about to learn how expensive that miscalculation would become. The first month at the Meridian Foundation, Lena kept her head down and her observations sharp. She filed grant applications with meticulous attention to detail, answered phones with professional warmth, organized Silas's calendar with the kind of efficiency that made her invisible in the best possible way. She learned names, patterns, the subtle hierarchies that governed who mattered and who didn't. The office operated on 2 levels. The surface level was genuine: scholarships for underprivileged students, community health initiatives, small business grants that actually help people. Lena processed applications from single mothers trying to start catering businesses, teenagers who needed tuition assistance, neighborhood associations requesting funds for after-school programs. That work felt real, felt like it mattered. Underneath ran a more complex operation. Certain grants got fast-tracked without the usual vetting. Specific community organizations received funding that seemed disproportionate to their stated missions. Money flowed in from donors whose names appeared on no public records, channeled through shell companies and offshore accounts that Lena recognized from her father's old playbook. She said nothing, asked no questions, just watched and learned. By week 6, she'd mapped the entire ecosystem. Marcus handled the money, a former accountant with nervous eyes who jumped every time someone said his name. Claire managed outreach and public relations, all glossy brochures and strategic photo opportunities. Robert worked security, though his background suggested military special operations rather than protecting charity workers. And Silas orchestrated everything from his corner office, balancing legitimate philanthropy with strategic money laundering like a conductor managing 2 orchestras playing different symphonies simultaneously. "You're good at this," Silas said one afternoon, appearing behind her desk without warning. Lena had learned he moved like that, quiet, observant, showing up when you least expected him. She looked up from the spreadsheet she'd been reconciling. At filing paperwork? At seeing patterns without announcing you've seen them. Most people either miss the complexities entirely, or they see them and immediately need to discuss, question, process aloud. He perched on the edge of her desk, casual in a way that suggested he didn't believe in maintaining artificial distance. "You just absorb and adapt. That's rare. I had good training growing up. My father's business required understanding what could be said openly versus what needed to stay unspoken." The shipping company. Silas had done his homework, clearly. East Coast operations, legitimate import-export with strategic relationships that occasionally bent regulations. It went under about 5 years ago. 4 years, 8 months. Lena saved the spreadsheet, met his eyes. Competitors with deeper pockets and fewer scruples pushed us out. My father tried to play honorably in a dishonorable game. He lost everything. Is that why you understand what we do here? Because you've seen both sides of the line? I understand that the line itself is fiction. There's just people trying to survive and people trying to help others survive and people trying to profit from both. Lena chose her words carefully. The Foundation profits from sources most would condemn, but uses those profits to create genuine good. That's not hypocrisy. That's pragmatism. Silas smiled, that sharp expression that meant she'd passed some invisible test. "I'm promoting you. Assistant Director of Operations. You'll work directly with me, manage the grant portfolio, coordinate with our major donors, salary doubles, office on this floor. Start Monday." Lena's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "That's quite a jump for someone who's been here 6 weeks. You've done 3 months of work in 6 weeks and improved efficiency in every system you've touched. Plus, you're intelligent enough to understand discretion and competent enough not to need constant supervision. I don't promote people because they've logged hours. I promote them because they've demonstrated value." He stood. "Unless you're not interested?" "I'm interested. Thank you, Silas." "Don't thank me yet. This position comes with complications." He gestured toward his office. "Walk with me." She followed him into the corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the historic district. Silas closed the door, pulled the blinds, privacy measures that made the room feel suddenly smaller, more intimate. "The donors I mentioned. Some of them are people you'll recognize from other contexts. Some of them are people you'd probably prefer not to meet." He poured 2 glasses of water from a carafe, handed her one. "One of them is Dante Rizzo." The name hit like cold water. Lena's hand tightened on the glass, but she didn't spill, didn't flinch. "I see. Rachel mentioned you had a complicated history with him. She didn't provide details, and I didn't ask, but I need to know if his involvement here creates a problem for you." Silas leaned against his desk, studying her. "Be honest, Lena. I can work around personal conflicts, but I can't work around surprises." Lena thought about lying, about minimizing, about protecting herself through omission. Then she remembered that Silas had built his reputation on reading people accurately. Lies would insult them both. I was married to him briefly, very briefly. It ended badly. I'm sure he doesn't remember me fondly, if he remembers me at all. She met Silas's gaze. Does that create a problem? Depends. Will you be able to work professionally if you encounter him in Foundation contexts? Yes. Lena surprised herself with how much she meant it. A month ago, the thought of seeing Dante again would have terrified her. Now it felt like an opportunity, a chance to show him she'd evolved past whatever he'd decided she was worth. I'm not the same person he married. He won't recognize what I've become. Silas considered this, then nodded. Fair enough. For what it's worth, Dante's involvement is minimal. An annual donation that's more about maintaining appearances than genuine commitment to our mission. You'll probably never interact with him directly, but I needed you to know. I appreciate the warning. There's one more thing. Silas's expression shifted, became more serious. This promotion means you'll see more of the mechanism, not just the money laundering. Everyone at your level understands that's happening, but the relationships that make it possible, the compromises required to maintain them, the decisions that keep us operating in this gray space. He paused. Some of those decisions involve people getting hurt, not by us directly, but as consequences of the systems we participate in. Can you live with that? Lena thought about her father, who tried to operate honorably and lost everything. She thought about Dante, who operated without honor and seemed to lose nothing. She thought about the single mothers receiving grants, the teenagers getting scholarships, the tangible good being created with tainted money. As long as the good we create outweighs the harm we enable, I can live with it, she said. If that balance shifts, we should have a conversation. Agreed. Silas extended his hand. Welcome to the complicated side of making a difference, Lena. The promotion changed everything. Lena's new office was smaller than Silas's, but positioned strategically. She could see everyone coming and going, could monitor the rhythm of the operation without seeming to watch. She managed the grant portfolio with the same meticulous attention she'd brought to filing, but now she also sat in meetings with donors, learned their names and agendas, understood what they wanted in exchange for their contributions. Most wanted legitimacy, a way to present themselves as philanthropists rather than criminals. Some wanted access, connections to politicians and community leaders that the foundation cultivated. A few wanted absolution, as if funding scholarships could balance the scales against their other activities. Lena learned to speak their language, to offer what they needed without promising more than Silas would deliver. She became known as competent, discreet, someone who understood the unspoken rules. Within 3 months, she was managing relationships Silas had previously handled personally. You're building quite a reputation, Rachel said one morning, over coffee in apartment 4F. They'd maintained the ritual, meeting twice a week to discuss strategy and share intelligence. People are starting to ask about you, who you are, where you came from, whether you're available for other projects. What kind of projects? Lena asked, though she could guess. The kind that require someone smart enough to manage complexity and unknown enough not to attract attention. Basically, what you're doing at the foundation but for private clients. Rachel refilled their mugs. You interested? Not yet. I'm still learning, still building credibility. Lena wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. Besides, the foundation gives me something those projects wouldn't, legitimacy. I'm not just facilitating transactions. I'm creating actual change. You sound like Silas. He's a good teacher. Lena smiled. Better than my last instructor in how power works. Rachel's expression turned thoughtful. Speaking of your last instructor, Dante's engagement to Veronica Saint Laurent is official, announced last week, wedding planned for 6 months from now. The information should have hurt, should have triggered something, jealousy, anger, grief for what might have been. Instead, Lena felt only detached curiosity, like hearing about strangers' plans that didn't involve her. Good for them, she said, meaning it. He gets his strategic alliance. She gets whatever she wants from the arrangement. Everyone wins. Except his reputation has taken some hits lately. Word's getting around that his business decisions are erratic, that he's making promises he can't keep. Rachel pulled out her phone, showed Lena a series of messages. 3 deals fell through last month. 2 partnerships dissolved. People are starting to question his judgment. Lena scanned the messages, recognized names from her research months ago. What's causing it? Hard to say. Could be Veronica's influence. She's known for aggressive strategies that alienate potential allies. Could be that Dante's attention is divided and he's missing details. Could be that the universe is just correcting for his overconfidence. Rachel took back her phone. Or it could be that someone's quietly undermining him. Their eyes met. Lena hadn't actively sabotaged Dante. She'd been too busy building her own foundation. But she'd also made strategic choices about where to direct certain donors, which opportunities to highlight in foundation communications, how to position the organization's work in ways that made Dante's contributions seem minor by comparison. "I'm not trying to destroy him," Lena said carefully. "I'm just trying to succeed. If his decline coincides with my rise, that's correlation, not causation. Keep telling yourself that." Rachel's smile suggested she didn't buy it entirely, but appreciated the restraint. "Just remember, men like Dante don't fail quietly. When they go down, they take people with them. Make sure you're not in the blast radius." The warning stayed with Lena as weeks turned into months. She watched Dante's influence contract while hers expanded. She cultivated relationships with donors he'd neglected, created programs that addressed needs he'd ignored, built trust with community leaders who'd grown tired of his performative charity. She didn't attack him directly. She just filled the spaces he'd left empty. By month 7, the foundation had doubled its community impact while reducing its dependence on questionable funding sources. Silas called it the best year in the organization's history. The board, those retired politicians and philanthropists who mostly rubber-stamped decisions, actually started paying attention, asking questions, engaging with the mission. "You've transformed this place," Silas said during their weekly strategy session. They'd fallen into a rhythm, meeting Monday mornings to align on priorities, Friday afternoons to review outcomes. The sessions had evolved from professional updates to genuine collaboration, sometimes stretching hours as they debated approaches and challenged each other's assumptions. "I just executed your vision," Lena deflected, though she knew it was more than that. She'd brought something Silas hadn't fully developed, an understanding of how to balance the foundation's dual nature, how to grow the legitimate work while carefully reducing the illegitimate dependencies. "My vision was always too academic, too theoretical. You made it operational." Silas leaned back in his chair, the afternoon light catching silver in his hair. At 42, he had the kind of face that would improve with age, strong bone structure, expressive eyes, the confidence of someone who'd earned his position through merit rather than inheritance. "I couldn't have done this without you, Lena." The acknowledgement felt significant, felt like more than professional appreciation. Lena had noticed the way their working relationship had shifted over months. The easy conversations, the shared coffee runs, the way Silas asked her opinion before making major decisions. She'd noticed, too, how he never mentioned a wife or girlfriend, how he seemed to work constantly, as if the foundation was his entire life. "We make a good team," she said, keeping it professional even as she recognized the spark of something else beneath the words. "We do." Silas hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There's a gala next month, major donor event, black tie, the whole performance. I usually attend alone, make rounds, leave early, but this year I'd like you there as my partner, professionally speaking, co-hosting, representing the foundation together. Would you be comfortable with that?" Partner, the word carried weight in Silas's world. It meant equal standing, shared authority, visible demonstration that Lena had become essential rather than auxiliary. "I'd be honored," she said. "Good. Because between us, these events are unbearable without someone intelligent to talk to." His smile turned genuine, warm. "Plus, you'll help me avoid the donors who want to discuss their golf handicaps for 45 minutes. The gala consumed the next month. Lena coordinated with Claire on messaging, reviewed the guest list with Marcus to understand who represented legitimate philanthropy versus strategic money laundering, worked with Silas to plan speaking points that would inspire donations without making promises they couldn't keep. She bought a dress, emerald silk that skimmed her body without clinging, elegant without being provocative. It cost more than she'd spent on clothes in the past year combined, but Rachel had insisted. "You're not representing yourself anymore. You're representing an organization that needs to look successful. Dress the part." The night of the gala, Lena stood in front of her bathroom mirror applying makeup with hands that had stopped shaking months ago. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable from the bride who'd signed divorce papers in a staged apartment 8 months earlier. That woman had been broken, invisible, discarded. This woman had sharp eyes, confident posture, the kind of presence that made people pay attention. Her phone buzzed. Silas, waiting downstairs in a town car. Lena grabbed her clutch, took one last look, and headed down. He stood beside the car in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him at the office. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Appreciation, maybe? Or recognition that tonight represented something more than a work event. "You look stunning," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself." Lena accepted his hand into the car, noticed how natural the gesture felt. How right. The drive to the venue passed in comfortable conversation about everything except work, books they'd read, cities they'd lived in, the small moments that shaped who they'd become. Lena learned that Silas had inherited his family's pharmaceutical fortune at 25 after his father died, that he'd spent a decade trying to distance himself from the company's questionable practices before realizing he could be more effective from inside the system than outside it. "I wanted to burn it all down at first," he admitted. "Sell everything, donate the money, start fresh with clean hands. Then I realized clean hands don't actually help anyone if you've given away all your ability to create change. So I kept the money, transformed the company into something less predatory, used the connections to build the foundation. It's not pure, but it's effective." "Sounds lonely," Lena observed. "Building something meaningful while knowing most people will only see the corruption underneath." It was, until recently. Silas met her eyes. Having someone who understands both sides, who can hold the complexity without judgment, that's made all the difference. The moment stretched between them, heavy with implication. Then the car arrived at the venue, and the performance began. The gala was everything Rachel had warned her about: champagne and caviar, designer gowns, and political maneuvering disguised as small talk. Lena moved through it with practiced grace, charming donors, deflecting inappropriate questions, presenting the foundation's work with just enough passion to seem genuine without appearing naive. Silas stayed close, introducing her as my partner in transforming the foundation's impact, giving her credit for programs she'd developed, treating her like an equal rather than an employee. People noticed. She could see them calculating, reassessing, updating their understanding of who she was and what she represented. Halfway through the evening, Lena excused herself to the restroom. She was checking her makeup when the door opened and a woman in a blood-red gown walked in. Tall, elegant, with the kind of bone structure that suggested European aristocracy. Veronica Saint Laurent. They'd never met, but Lena recognized her from months of research. Veronica paused when she saw Lena, her dark eyes assessing with predatory intelligence. "You're Silas Crown's new protege," Veronica said, not a question. Her accent was subtle, educated. Paris and London layered over something sharper underneath. "Lena Marlowe. And you're Veronica Saint Laurent. Congratulations on your engagement." Lena kept her voice neutral, professional. "Thank you. Though I notice you didn't include my fiancé's name. Most people say congratulations on your engagement to Dante, assuming he's the prize." Veronica's smile had edges. "You know better. I know Dante Rizzo is a means to an end for someone like you, just as I was a means to an end for him." Lena applied lipstick, kept her hand steady. "Difference is you actually benefit from the arrangement. I was just collateral damage." Veronica's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're the bride from the wedding night divorce. I thought you'd disappeared." "I did. Now I'm back, but different." Lena turned to face her directly. "Does he know I work at the foundation?" "If he does, he hasn't mentioned it. Dante doesn't pay attention to things he's decided don't matter." Veronica studied Lena with new interest. "You've done well for yourself. Assistant director, Silas's trusted partner, rising star in the philanthropic world. Quite the transformation from discarded wife to power player." "I had good motivation. Nothing focuses ambition like being treated as disposable." Lena picked up her clutch. "Enjoy your wedding, Veronica. I hope you get exactly what you negotiated for." She left before Veronica could respond, her heart pounding but her pace measured. The encounter felt like crossing an invisible line, acknowledgement from Dante's world that she existed again, that she mattered enough to register on their radar. Back in the ballroom, Silas materialized at her elbow. "Everything okay? You look tense." "Just ran into Dante's fiancée. She knows who I am." Lena accepted the champagne he offered. Should I be worried? About Veronica? No, she's pragmatic, not vindictive. If anything, she probably respects that you survived Dante's disposal and rebuilt yourself. Silas guided her toward the windows, away from the crowd. But I should tell you something. Dante's here tonight. Arrived late, currently holding court near the bar. I wanted to warn you before you encountered him unexpectedly. Lena's stomach tightened, but not with fear. With something sharper. Anticipation, maybe. Or the dark satisfaction of knowing she'd become someone he hadn't expected her to become. Thank you for the warning. I can handle it. I know you can, but you don't have to handle it alone. Silas's hand found hers, a brief pressure of solidarity. We're partners, remember? Whatever happens, we face it together. The word settled something in Lena's chest. For 8 months, she'd been operating alone, surviving, adapting, building herself into someone formidable, having someone offer genuine partnership, someone who saw her clearly and valued what he saw, felt revolutionary. Partners, she agreed, squeezing his hand before letting go. They moved through the rest of the evening together, a united front that drew notice and speculation. Lena could feel eyes tracking them, conversations pausing as they passed, the social calculus adjusting to accommodate this new dynamic. She kept her awareness tuned to the room, noting where Dante was, avoiding his section without making it obvious she was avoiding him. Until suddenly, she wasn't. He appeared in her path like he'd been waiting for the moment. Still handsome, still radiating that controlled power, but something in his face had changed. He looked older, harder, like the last 8 months had cost him something he couldn't quite afford to lose. Lena. Her name in his mouth sounded wrong, like he'd forgotten how to pronounce it. I didn't expect to see you here. I work here. Assistant Director of Operations. She kept her voice professional, her posture relaxed. I didn't expect to see you either. Rachel mentioned your involvement was minimal. It is. I came as Veronica's guest. She's on the board. Dante's eyes scanned her dress, her confident stance, the way she held his gaze without flinching. You look different. I am different. Turns out being discarded creates excellent motivation for self-improvement. Lena smiled, sharp and controlled. How are the wedding plans coming? Fine. Good. He seemed off balance, uncertain, emotion she'd never seen from him before. Listen, Lena, about what happened between us is in the past. We're divorced, you're engaged, I've moved on. There's nothing to discuss. Lena spotted Silas making his way toward them through the crowd. If you'll excuse me, my partner needs me. She stepped past Dante before he could respond, felt his confusion following her like heat. Silas reached her side, his presence solid and reassuring. That looked intense, he murmured. It was brief. I told him the past stays in the past. Lena linked her arm through Silas's, a gesture that would be visible to everyone watching, including Dante. He doesn't get to matter anymore. Silas smiled, understanding exactly what she was doing. No, he doesn't. Ready to give our closing remarks? Absolutely. They took the stage together, presenting the Foundation's annual report with genuine pride and strategic vision. Lena spoke about community impact, about transformation through partnership, about the power of believing in people's potential instead of writing them off. She didn't look at Dante while she spoke, but she felt him watching, felt him understanding that every word was proof of what he'd thrown away. The applause when they finished was genuine, enthusiastic. People approached afterward to congratulate them, to ask about opportunities, to express interest in deeper involvement. Lena navigated it all with Silas at her side, their partnership so natural that several people assumed they were a couple. They didn't correct the assumption. Hours later in the town car heading back, Lena felt the adrenaline finally crash. She slumped against the seat, exhausted but exhilarated. You were magnificent tonight, Silas said quietly. Facing Dante, commanding that room, owning your transformation. I've never seen anything like it. I had good support. Lena turned to look at him, this man who'd given her a chance when she'd had nothing, who'd treated her like an equal when everyone else saw her as damaged goods. Thank you, Silas, for all of it. Thank me by staying, by continuing to build this with me. He hesitated, then added, and maybe by considering that what we've built isn't just professional anymore. The confession hung in the air between them. Lena knew she should be careful, should protect herself from getting involved with someone who could hurt her the way Dante had. But Silas wasn't Dante. He'd never treated her as disposable, never used her as a chess piece, never valued her based on what she could provide rather than who she was. "I've been considering that for months," she admitted. "I just wasn't sure you felt the same way." "I do, but I wanted you to find your footing first, to become who you needed to become without pressure or complication from me." Silas reached for her hand, his touch tentative, asking permission. "Now you're standing on your own, powerful and brilliant and terrifying. I'm asking if you'd consider standing with me by choice, not necessity." Lena thought about how far she'd come, from that penthouse where Dante had handed her divorce papers, through months of exile and transformation, to this moment where someone was offering partnership instead of possession. The journey had been brutal, but it had made her into someone who could recognize the difference. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." Silas smiled, relief and joy transforming his features. He lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfect. "Then let's see where this goes, together." The car pulled up to her building. Silas walked her to the door like a gentleman from another era, kissed her hand again, promised to see her Monday morning. Lena watched him drive away, then headed upstairs feeling like she was floating. In apartment 4F, Rachel was probably tracking every development, calculating outcomes, pleased with how the evening had unfolded. In some penthouse across town, Dante was probably confused by the woman Lena had become, trying to reconcile the invisible bride with the confident professional who'd dismissed him. In her own apartment, Lena poured herself wine and stood at the window watching the city lights. 8 months ago, she'd stood at a similar window believing her life was over. Now she understood it had just been beginning. The woman Dante had discarded was gone, burned away by necessity, and rebuilt through choice. In her place stood someone stronger, smarter, more dangerous than anyone had expected. And the best part? This was just the beginning. She'd proven she could survive, could adapt, could build something meaningful from wreckage. Now it was time to see what else she could do. The city glittered below her like possibilities made of light. Lena raised her glass in silent toast to the woman she'd become and the empire she was just beginning to build. The Monday after the gala arrived with an unusual tension threading through the foundation offices. Lena felt it the moment she stepped off the elevator. Conversations that stopped too abruptly, glances that lingered a beat too long, the kind of charged atmosphere that preceded either celebration or disaster. Claire intercepted her before she reached her office. "Silas wants to see you, now. He's with Marcus and Robert. They've been in there since 7. Emergency meeting. Lena's instincts sharpened. "Do you know what it's about?" "No, but Robert looked like he was ready to shoot someone, so probably not good news." Claire's expression was worried. "Be careful." Lena knocked once on Silas's door, then entered. The 3 men were positioned around the conference table like generals planning a war. Silas at the head, Marcus hunched over his laptop, looking more nervous than usual, Robert standing with his arms crossed, and that military bearing that suggested violence was always an option. "Close the door," Silas said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were storm-dark. "We have a problem." Lena sat, kept her hands steady on the table. "Tell me." Marcus turned his laptop to face her. On the screen was a financial report showing transactions flagged by federal investigators, money moving through the foundation's accounts in patterns that suggested organized crime activity. Someone had leaked their internal records to law enforcement. When did this happen? Lena scanned the dates, the amounts, the routing numbers she recognized from months of managing the portfolio. The leak occurred Friday night, during the gala. Silas's jaw was tight. Someone with access to our financial systems sent encrypted files to 3 different federal agencies: the FBI, IRS, and a financial crimes task force. Who has that level of access? 6 people: me, Marcus, you, Claire, Robert, and our external auditor who's been with us for 8 years. Marcus pulled up another screen showing access logs. The leak came from an IP address that traces back to the Foundation's internal network. Someone did this from inside the building. Lena's mind raced through possibilities. Claire had been with the Foundation for 5 years, Robert for 3. The auditor had no motive to destroy an organization that paid him generously. That left the newer additions: herself and whoever Marcus might have recently granted access to. "What's the damage assessment?" she asked. "If the files are authentic and complete, they could shut us down within 90 days, freeze our accounts, arrest key personnel, dismantle everything we've built." Silas stood, paced to the window. "But there's something odd about the timing. The leak happened during the gala when all senior staff were accounted for and visible. Whoever did this wanted it to happen while we were all together, all alibied." "Someone's setting us up," Robert said, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who'd seen this play before, "making it look like internal betrayal to distract from external attack. Or it is internal betrayal, and they were smart enough to cover their tracks." Lena studied the access logs more carefully. "Marcus, can you isolate which specific files were sent?" He typed rapidly, pulled up a list. Lena's blood went cold. The leaked files included grant records, donor information, and detailed financial routing, but they were incomplete. Critical pieces were missing, pieces that would have made the money laundering obvious to investigators. "This isn't a whistleblower trying to expose corruption," she said slowly. "This is someone trying to create chaos without actually destroying us. Look at what's missing: the smoking gun transactions, the shell company documentation, the direct links to criminal organizations. Whoever leaked this gave investigators enough to investigate, but not enough to prosecute." Silas turned from the window, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "You're right. This is harassment, not execution. Someone wants us distracted, vulnerable, looking over our shoulders." "Who benefits from that?" Robert asked. The answer crystallized in Lena's mind with sudden cold clarity. Dante Rizzo. 3 sets of eyes locked on her. She stood, moved to the window beside Silas, looked out at the city below. "Think about it. He saw me at the gala, saw me thriving in a role he probably didn't know I had, saw me with you, Silas, presenting as equals. That threatens his narrative that I was nobody worth remembering, and if he's been losing ground lately, which Rachel says he has, he needs someone to blame, someone to attack to demonstrate he's still powerful." "You think he'd sabotage the foundation to hurt you?" Marcus sounded skeptical. "Not to hurt me specifically, to destabilize an organization where I've found success, to prove he can still reach me, to remind everyone that crossing him has consequences." Lena turned to face them. "Plus, attacking the foundation indirectly attacks his competition. Silas, you've been absorbing donors Dante used to control, building relationships with community leaders he neglected, making him look ineffective by comparison. This kills 2 birds. It undermines your operation, and it punishes me." Silas nodded slowly. "It fits his pattern. When challenged, he doesn't compete honestly. He sabotages. Makes his opponents fight defensive battles while he repositions." "So what do we do?" Claire had appeared in the doorway at some point, apparently deciding the closed-door meeting was less important than being informed. "If federal investigators are already looking at us, we can't just ignore this. We don't ignore it, we get ahead of it." Lena's strategic mind kicked into high gear, the same instincts that had helped her rebuild herself now focusing on protecting what she'd helped build. "Marcus, how much of our operation is actually illegal versus just questionable? Maybe 30% of our funding comes from sources we couldn't fully defend in court. The rest is legitimate donations or borderline cases we could argue either way." Marcus pulled up another spreadsheet. "The programs themselves are clean, actual community work, actual impact, actual good being done. Then we separate the wheat from the chaff, immediately." Lena started pacing, thinking out loud. "We create a transparent audit process, invite external oversight, demonstrate cooperation with any investigation. Simultaneously, we quietly close the relationships that can't withstand scrutiny and replace that funding with legitimate sources. Show investigators an organization actively reforming, not one trying to hide." "That's exactly what I've been wanting to do," Silas said, something like relief crossing his features. "But the board resisted, said it was too risky, too expensive, too disruptive." "The board doesn't have a choice anymore. This leak just forced our hand." Lena turned to Robert. "Can you trace the actual source? Not just the IP address, but the person behind it?" "Already working on it. Should have something by end of day." Robert's smile was predatory. "And when I find them, I'll make sure they understand why betraying this organization was a career-ending mistake." No. Lena's voice was sharp. No violence, no intimidation, nothing that gives investigators ammunition. We respond to this like professionals, not criminals. That's how we prove we're better than what they think we are. Robert looked to Silas, who nodded agreement. She's right. We play this smart, not brutal. Find out who did it, but we handle them through legal channels. The meeting broke up with assignments. Marcus would start the financial audit. Robert would hunt the leak. Claire would manage communications. Silas would approach the board. Lena would coordinate everything, keep the pieces moving, ensure they presented a unified front. As the others filed out, Silas caught Lena's arm. Are you sure about Dante? This is a serious accusation. I'm not sure about anything. But it's the theory that makes the most sense given the timing, the incomplete nature of the leak, and his recent visibility of me succeeding. Lena met his eyes. Whether I'm right or wrong about the source, the response is the same. We get better, cleaner, stronger. Make ourselves attack-proof. You sound like you've done this before. My father's company went down because competitors spread rumors we were cutting corners on safety regulations. The rumors were false, but the damage was real. By the time we proved our innocence, we'd lost contracts we couldn't afford to lose. Lena's voice tightened with old pain. I watched him try to defend instead of pivot. I won't make that mistake. Silas pulled her into his office, closed the door. I need you to know something. Whatever happens with this investigation, whatever we have to do to survive it, you're not alone. We face this together. I know. Lena let herself lean into him for just a moment, drawing strength from his solidity. That's why we'll win. Because I'm not the same person Dante threw away. I'm not fighting alone anymore. No, you're not. Silas kissed her forehead, a gesture of comfort and promise. Now let's go save what we built. The next 48 hours were brutal. Marcus worked 20-hour days separating legitimate operations from questionable ones, creating documentation that would satisfy investigators. Robert traced the leak to an IP address that bounced through 3 proxy servers before disappearing into the dark web. Professional work, not amateur hour. Claire drafted statements emphasizing the Foundation's commitment to transparency and community impact. Lena coordinated it all while simultaneously reaching out to donors, explaining the situation before they heard rumors, offering reassurance that the Foundation's mission remained unchanged even as its methods evolved. Some donors disappeared immediately, the ones who'd valued opacity over impact. Others stayed, appreciative of the honesty, willing to support the Reformation. By Wednesday, they'd lost 18% of their funding but gained something more valuable: credibility. News outlets ran stories about the Foundation's proactive transparency, its willingness to reform rather than defend questionable practices. Community leaders praised their integrity. Even some federal investigators privately acknowledged they'd never seen an organization respond to scrutiny so constructively. Thursday morning, Rachel appeared at Lena's office door with coffee and information. Your theory was right. Dante's fingerprints are all over this. Lena looked up from the grant applications she'd been reviewing. Tell me. Robert traced the leak to a security contractor Dante uses for corporate espionage. Same guy who hacked 3 competitors last year. Same guy who helped Dante acquire confidential bid information on the Eastern Ports project. Rachel sat, slid a folder across the desk. He was sloppy this time, left digital breadcrumbs that lead directly back to Dante's operation. Why would he be sloppy? If he's a professional, because he wasn't trying to hide. Dante wanted you to know this came from him, wanted you scared, wanted you to understand that rebuilding yourself doesn't put you beyond his reach. Rachel's expression was grim. This was a warning shot, Lena. He's telling you that he can destroy what you've built anytime he wants. Lena felt cold fury settle in her chest. Does he know we've traced it back to him? Not yet. Robert's been careful, but it's only a matter of time before Dante realizes we connected the dots. Rachel leaned forward. You need to decide how to respond. Go to authorities with proof of corporate espionage, hit back through legal channels, or handle this another way. What does Silas think? He wants to prosecute. Says we have enough evidence to destroy Dante's credibility, possibly get him arrested for interference with a charitable organization and data theft. He's ready to go to war. Lena stood, walked to her window. Below, people moved through their lives unaware of the chess game being played above their heads. Dante had made a move thinking she'd cower or crumble. He'd underestimated her again. "What would you do?" she asked Rachel. "Me? I'd give Dante exactly what he deserves, exposure, but not through courts, through his peers." Rachel's smile was sharp. In his world, legal problems are manageable. Reputation damage is fatal. If people discover he attacked a charitable organization out of petty revenge against an ex-wife, that makes him look weak, vindictive, unstable, the kind of partner no one wants. "Veronica would leave him," Lena said, understanding the implications. "Absolutely. She's marrying him for strategic alliance, not love. If he becomes a liability instead of an asset, she'll cut him loose without hesitation." Rachel stood beside Lena at the window. "The question is whether you're comfortable playing that ruthlessly." Lena thought about the woman she'd been 9 months ago, the bride signing divorce papers, accepting exile, disappearing quietly. That woman would have been horrified by this conversation. That woman had believed in fairness, in fighting cleanly, and trusting that good behavior would be rewarded. That woman was dead. In her place stood someone who understood that in Dante's world, clean fights were just another way to lose. "Set up a meeting," Lena said. "With Veronica, just her and me, somewhere private." Rachel's eyebrow arched. "You're sure about this?" "Completely. Dante wanted to remind me he could reach me. I'm going to remind him that I can reach him too, and that I've learned to hit where it really hurts." The meeting happened Saturday afternoon in a private room at an upscale tea room, neutral territory that felt more civilized than threatening. Veronica arrived exactly on time, immaculate in cream cashmere, her dark eyes assessing Lena with the same predatory intelligence as their bathroom encounter. "This is unexpected," Veronica said, settling into her chair with aristocratic grace. "Your associate was very mysterious about the purpose." "I wanted to have a conversation between professionals, woman to woman, without the complications of our respective relationships with Dante." Lena poured tea with steady hands. "I have information you need to hear. What you do with it is entirely your choice." "I'm listening." Lena slid the folder across the table. Inside was everything Robert had compiled: digital trails, financial transactions, proof that Dante had orchestrated the attack on the foundation. She watched Veronica's face as she reviewed the documents, saw the moment comprehension clicked into place. "He went after your organization because you work there." Veronica's voice was flat, controlled. "Corporate espionage and sabotage of a charitable foundation because his ex-wife found success somewhere he couldn't control." "Yes. And he was careless enough that we traced it back to him, which means he either wanted us to know, making this a threat, or he's losing his touch, making this a sign of decline." Lena sipped her tea. "Either way, it demonstrates poor judgment and emotional decision-making. The kind of behavior that makes someone an unreliable partner." Veronica set down the folder, her expression unreadable. "Why bring this to me instead of authorities?" "Because legal prosecution would be messy, public, and ultimately might not stick. Dante has lawyers who could muddy the waters for years. But you have something more powerful than courts. You have leverage over what matters most to him right now." Lena met Veronica's eyes. "His reputation, his alliance with your family, his future. You want me to leave him?" It wasn't a question. "I want you to make an informed decision about whether the man you're marrying is the strategic asset you thought he was, or a liability who attacks charitable organizations to soothe his ego." Lena's voice was calm, reasonable. "If you leave him publicly, citing concerns about his judgment and stability, that destroys him more effectively than any prosecution. Your father respects you. If you say Dante isn't trustworthy, that opinion carries weight." Veronica studied Lena with newfound respect. "You've changed significantly since our first encounter. The woman I met at the gala was polished but cautious. This woman is calculating. This woman learned from being discarded, learned that sentiment is weakness and strategy is survival." Lena refilled their cups. "I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm showing you evidence that your fiancé is unstable and vindictive. What you do with that information serves your interests, not mine. But it would serve your interests if I destroyed him. It would serve my interests if he learned that attacking people who've moved past him has consequences. Whether that lesson comes from you, from legal prosecution, or from his own continued decline doesn't matter to me. I just want him to understand that I'm not the woman he threw away. I'm the woman who rebuilt herself into someone he should have been afraid to underestimate." Veronica laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "I see why Silas values you. You think like someone who's survived actual danger, not just performed danger." She stood, collected the folder. "I'll review this more thoroughly. If it's as damning as it appears, I'll handle Dante appropriately. Not for you, but because marrying a man who makes decisions based on wounded pride is a poor strategic choice. That's all I'm asking. For what it's worth, I think Dante made a catastrophic error letting you go. You would have been a far more valuable wife than he realized." Veronica extended her hand. "I suspect we'll see each other again. Under better circumstances, I hope." Lena shook her hand, felt the understanding pass between them. Two women who'd learned to navigate a world built by men who underestimated them. "I suspect you're right." Veronica left. Lena sat alone in the tea room, drinking her tea and feeling like she'd just set a series of dominoes in motion that couldn't be stopped. Rachel had been right. In Dante's world, reputation was everything, and she'd just given Veronica every reason to destroy his. The fallout came faster than expected. By Monday, news broke that Veronica Saint Laurent had ended her engagement to Dante Rizzo, citing fundamental differences in judgment and priorities. By Wednesday, 3 of Dante's major business partners had publicly distanced themselves from his organization. By Friday, he'd lost his position on 2 corporate boards, and his reputation as a strategic thinker had cratered. Lena watched it happen with detached fascination, like observing a controlled demolition. She'd expected satisfaction, maybe even triumph. Instead, she felt mostly tired. Destroying Dante hadn't healed the wounds he'd created. It had just proven she could survive despite them. "You're quiet today," Silas observed during their Friday afternoon review. The Foundation had weathered the investigation successfully, even gained positive attention for their transparency. But the victory felt hollow when Lena kept thinking about the cost of getting here. "I'm processing," she admitted. "I got what I wanted. Dante's influence is collapsing. He's learning what it feels like to be discarded, dismissed, treated as irrelevant. But I don't feel the way I thought I would." "How did you think you'd feel?" "Vindicated, powerful, like I'd proven something important." Lena turned from the window to face him. "Instead, I just feel like I've become what I hated about his world. Strategic, calculating, willing to destroy people to protect myself." Silas crossed to her, took her hands. "There's a difference between what you did and what Dante does. He destroys people because they inconvenience him or wound his pride. You defended yourself in this organization from a legitimate attack. That's not the same thing, isn't it? I manipulated Veronica into leaving him, used her strategic thinking against him. That's not defense, that's offense. You showed her evidence of his judgment failures and let her make her own decision. That's not manipulation, that's information sharing." Silas squeezed her hands. "Lena, I've watched you build yourself into someone extraordinary these past months. You haven't become cruel or vindictive. You've become strong enough to protect what matters to you. There's nothing wrong with that. But where's the line? How do I know when I've crossed from protecting myself to becoming just another player in their ugly game? By continuing to ask that question, by choosing mercy when you have the option, by building something positive instead of just tearing down your enemies." Silas pulled her closer. "You could have destroyed Dante completely, given that evidence to authorities, destroyed him legally and personally. Instead, you gave him a chance to learn, to change, to understand that his actions have consequences. That's more grace than he deserves." Lena let herself lean into Silas's embrace, drawing comfort from his certainty. Maybe he was right. Maybe she hadn't crossed the line into becoming what she hated. Maybe she'd just learned to protect herself in a world that punished weakness. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She pulled it out, felt her stomach drop when she read the message. "I underestimated you. That was foolish. I'm sorry for what I did, to you personally and to your organization. You deserve better. I hope someday you can forgive me. D." She showed Silas the message. He read it, his expression thoughtful. "Do you believe he means it?" "I don't know. Maybe he's just afraid of what else I might do. Maybe he's genuinely regretting his choices." Lena stared at the message. "Does it matter?" "Only if you want it to matter." Lena thought about the woman she'd been on her wedding night, desperate for Dante to see her value, to recognize her worth, to acknowledge what he was throwing away. That woman would have treasured this apology, would have seen it as validation. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd built something better than Dante's acknowledgement. She'd built herself. She deleted the message without responding. It doesn't matter. He's my past. This, the foundation, you, the work we're doing, this is my future. I'm not interested in rehashing old wounds when I'm busy building new possibilities. Silas smiled, proud and relieved. That's the woman I fell in love with. Forward-looking, unstoppable, uninterested in what she's already survived. The words hung in the air between them. Fell in love with. First time either of them had used that phrase. Lena's heart hammered, but she didn't pull away, didn't deflect. You love me? She asked quietly. I do. Have for months, probably, but I wanted you to be sure of yourself before I complicated things with my feelings. Silas cupped her face gently. You don't have to say it back. I know you're still figuring out who you are, what you want. I just needed you to know that someone sees the whole of you, the strength, and the wounds, and the brilliance, and loves all of it. Lena felt something crack open in her chest, some last defense she'd been maintaining crumbling under the weight of being genuinely seen and valued. Not for what she could provide or what she represented, but for who she actually was. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I didn't expect to. I thought I'd be too damaged, too cautious. But you made it safe to rebuild myself. You gave me space to become someone worth loving. You were always worth loving. I just gave you space to believe it. Silas kissed her, gentle and certain, a promise of partnership without possession. When they finally pulled apart, Lena felt like she'd crossed some invisible threshold. The woman who'd been discarded on her wedding night had finally completely disappeared. In her place stood someone whole, powerful, loved not for what she could offer, but for who she'd chosen to become. So what happens now? She asked. Now we keep building. The foundation, us, the future we want to create. Silas pulled her back to the window, wrapped his arms around her from behind so they both faced the city. Together, equal partners in everything that matters. Lena looked out at the skyline, at the city that had witnessed her destruction and reconstruction. Somewhere out there, Dante was learning what it meant to lose everything through his own choices. Somewhere her family was living better lives funded by her divorce settlement. Somewhere the students receiving foundation scholarships were building futures that wouldn't have existed without her work. And here, in this office, in this man's arms, Lena had found something she'd stopped believing existed. A partnership built on mutual respect, genuine love, and the shared commitment to creating meaning from complexity. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd been promised on her wedding day. It was better, because it was real, earned, chosen with full awareness of what the choice meant. The city glittered below them like a promise. And for the first time since that devastating night 9 months ago, Lena believed in promises again. The weeks following the gala brought changes Lena hadn't anticipated. Silas's public acknowledgement of their partnership, both professional and increasingly personal, shifted how people treated her. Donors who'd once patronized her now sought her opinion. Board members consulted her before making decisions. The foundation staff looked to her for leadership with the same deference they'd previously reserved only for Silas. More significantly, Dante's world began to fracture in ways that seemed almost orchestrated, though Lena had done nothing directly to cause it. 3 more partnerships dissolved this week, Rachel reported during their Tuesday morning coffee. She slid a tablet across the table showing financial reports and leaked communications, all citing concerns about Dante's reliability and judgment. His engagement to Veronica was supposed to strengthen his position. Instead, it's exposing how dependent he was on illusions of stability. Lena scanned the documents, recognizing names from the syndicate network she'd been learning about through foundation work. What's Veronica doing about it? Distancing herself strategically. She hasn't called off the wedding, but she's making sure everyone knows her father's empire operates independently of Dante's declining influence. Rachel refilled their mugs. Word is Alejandro is reconsidering whether the marriage is worth the reputational risk. So Dante's losing exactly what he sacrificed our marriage to gain. Lena felt nothing hearing this. No satisfaction, no guilt, just detached observation of consequences playing out. How much of this is natural collapse versus someone actively undermining him? Does it matter? Rachel's expression suggested she knew more than she was saying. You've built something legitimate. He built everything on ego and intimidation. When those foundations crack, structures fall. That's just physics. Lena suspected there was more to it. Rachel had connections everywhere, influence in places Lena was only beginning to understand. But she didn't push. Some questions were better left unasked. At the foundation, Lena and Silas fell into a rhythm that blurred professional and personal boundaries in ways that felt natural rather than complicated. They worked long hours on expansion projects, new community centers, scholarship programs that actually transformed lives, partnerships with legitimate organizations that shared their vision of creating change through strategic resource allocation. After work, they'd grab dinner at small restaurants where nobody cared about their status, talk about everything from philosophy to their childhoods, slowly building intimacy through shared vulnerability. My father was brilliant but ruthless, Silas told her one evening over Thai food in a neighborhood dive. He believed compassion was weakness, that helping people made them dependent rather than empowered. I spent my whole life trying to prove him wrong. Sometimes I wonder if building the foundation was about creating change or just rebellion. Can it be both? Lena wrapped noodles around her fork. My father was the opposite, so committed to honor that he couldn't adapt when the world around him stopped valuing it. I spent years believing his way was noble. Now I think maybe he was just inflexible. We're both trying to find the space between our father's extremes. Silas reached across the table, his fingers finding hers. I'm glad we're finding it together. The relationship deepened slowly, carefully, both of them aware they were building something that needed stronger foundations than passion alone. Lena appreciated Silas's patience, the way he never pushed for more than she was ready to give, the way he treated her partnership as essential rather than ornamental. After Dante's transactional approach to marriage, Silas's genuine respect felt revolutionary. 2 months after the gala, everything changed in a single phone call. Lena was reviewing grant applications in her office when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Is this Lena Marlowe? A woman's voice, professional but strained. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Jennifer Vasquez. I'm an investigative journalist working on a story about organized crime's infiltration of charitable organizations. I have information about the Meridian Foundation that I believe you should see. Lena's blood went cold. I'm not interested in speaking to reporters. Even if what I have to show you proves that Dante Rizzo has been using the foundation to target you, that he's been planning something since the moment you started working there, Jennifer's voice carried urgency. Miss Marlowe, you're in danger. I can prove it. Please, just meet with me. 1 hour, public place. Bring someone you trust if that makes you feel safer. Lena's mind raced. This could be a trap, manipulation, a way to compromise the foundation or her position. But something in Jennifer's voice rang true, genuine concern, not opportunism. How did you get this information? From someone inside Dante's organization who wants out. Someone who watched what he did to you and decided she couldn't be complicit anymore. Jennifer paused. Her name is Monica. She was his personal assistant for 6 years. She has documentation of everything. Monica. Lena remembered her vaguely from the wedding, a quiet woman in her 30s who'd managed logistics with efficient invisibility. If she'd been documenting Dante's activities for 6 years, she'd have damning evidence. Where and when, Lena asked. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the foundation. Neutral territory, plenty of witnesses, easy escape routes. Lena brought Silas, who'd insisted on coming the moment she told him about the call. Rachel had also materialized, claiming she'd been in the neighborhood, though Lena suspected she'd been monitoring communications and picked up on the meeting. Jennifer Vasquez was younger than her voice suggested, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes and the kind of intensity that came from chasing stories nobody else wanted to touch. She sat in a back corner booth, a laptop and thick folder of documents spread before her. Thank you for coming, Jennifer said as they sat. I know this is irregular, but what I've uncovered is time-sensitive and, frankly, terrifying. She opened the laptop, turned it so they could see. The screen showed a detailed timeline starting from Lena's wedding day. tracking her movements, her employment at the foundation, her relationship with Silas. Every significant event documented with dates, times, photographs taken from a distance. Dante has been surveilling you since he moved you to that apartment, Jennifer explained. Not for protection like he claimed, for control. He wanted to know where you went, who you talked to, what you were building. And more importantly, he wanted to know when to destroy it. Silas's hand found Lena's under the table, steadying. Destroy what? Jennifer pulled up another document, communications between Dante and someone identified only as contractor. The messages discussed removing the foundation problem, eliminating the crown complication, and permanent solutions to the Marlowe situation. He's planning to frame the foundation for something catastrophic, Jennifer continued. Use his donor status to plant evidence of major fraud, embezzlement, money laundering beyond what's actually happening, ties to terrorist financing. He's been building the case for months. When it goes public, it will destroy the organization, ruin your reputations, possibly send you both to prison. Lena felt her world tilting. Why? I've done nothing to him. I've built something completely separate from his life. Because you succeeded where you were supposed to disappear. Because every grant you approve, every program you build, every donor you cultivate makes his contributions look smaller by comparison. He married you to demonstrate control, divorced you to demonstrate decisiveness. Your survival and success undermines both narratives. Jennifer's expression turned sympathetic. And because his engagement to Veronica is falling apart, her father finally said no, citing Dante's deteriorating reputation and poor judgment. Dante blames you for that somehow, believes you've been actively sabotaging him. That's insane, Lena breathed. I haven't thought about him in months except to avoid him. Your success is sabotage to someone who needs everyone he discards to stay broken. Rachel leaned forward, studying the documents with professional interest. When does he plan to execute this? 2 weeks. He's arranged for federal auditors to receive an anonymous tip about foundation finances. He's planted false documentation in your systems through your IT contractor, someone on his payroll. When the auditors come, they'll find exactly what they expect to find. You'll be arrested, the foundation shut down, everything you've built destroyed. Silas's jaw tightened. Do you have proof of the planted evidence? Jennifer slid the folder across the table. Monica documented everything. Server access logs, payment records to the IT contractor, copies of the false documents before they were planted, communications between Dante and the federal contact he's corrupted. It's all here. Lena flipped through the folder, her hands shaking with fury rather than fear. Page after page of evidence showing Dante's systematic plan to destroy her, not because she'd threatened him, but because she'd dared to exist successfully after he'd decided she should disappear. Why is Monica doing this? Silas asked. What does she gain from exposing him? Conscience, maybe. Or maybe she's just tired of watching him destroy people for ego. Jennifer closed her laptop. She wants immunity in exchange for testimony. I want the story. You want to survive. We all have aligned interests. Rachel pulled out her phone, typed something rapidly. I know people at the Justice Department, people who would be very interested in prosecuting someone who's been corrupting federal auditors and framing charitable organizations. But we need more than documentation. We need Dante caught in the act, on record confirming his intentions. How? Lena asked, though part of her already knew the answer. You confront him, get him talking, record everything. Rachel's expression was calculating, strategic. He's arrogant enough to confess if he thinks he's already won. If he believes you're trapped and powerless, he'll want you to know exactly how he destroyed you. Silas shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. That's too dangerous. Dante's desperate, and desperate people are violent. Which is why she won't go alone, Rachel countered. We'll wire her, have backup in place, control the environment. But Lena's right. She's the only one Dante will talk to honestly. He wants her to know she lost. That ego is what we'll use to bury him. Lena looked at the surveillance photos, at the timeline documenting a year of her life being watched and assessed like a problem to be solved. She thought about the foundation, about the families receiving scholarships, about the community centers being built with funds she'd carefully managed. She thought about Silas, about the partnership they'd created, about the future they were beginning to imagine together. All of it threatened by a man who couldn't tolerate being proven wrong about her worth. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Tell me what you need." The next week was preparation. Rachel's Justice Department contact, a deputy director named Sarah Chen, who owed Rachel several favors, agreed to provide immunity for Monica's testimony and investigative resources for building a case against Dante. Monica was relocated to a safe house, her documentation verified and authenticated. Jennifer worked on her story, ready to publish the moment arrests were made. Lena practiced the confrontation with Rachel, coaching her. How to provoke Dante's ego, how to keep him talking, how to get him to confirm specifics that would be admissible in court. They rehearsed scenarios, anticipated his responses, planned for contingencies. Silas hated every moment of it, but respected Lena's choice. "Promise me you'll be careful," he said the night before the meeting. They were in his apartment, a converted loft with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. "Promise me if anything feels wrong, you'll abort and get out." "I promise." Lena leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "This ends tomorrow, Silas. One way or another, Dante stops controlling my narrative." He never controlled it. He just thought he did. Silas kissed her forehead, her cheek, finally her lips, gentle and reassuring. "You've always been the one writing this story. Tomorrow you just make sure everyone else knows it." The meeting was set for noon at Dante's primary office, a high-rise downtown that housed his legitimate business operations. Lena wore a wire so sophisticated it was invisible, provided by Sarah Chen's technical team. Rachel had people positioned throughout the building, security consultants who'd been inserted into Dante's own protection detail days earlier. Backup was everywhere, invisible but ready. Lena rode the elevator to the 32nd floor feeling strangely calm. A year ago, confronting Dante would have terrified her. Now it felt like closing a chapter, finishing business that should have been resolved months ago. His assistant, a new one, younger than Monica, already wearing the exhausted expression of someone managing an impossible boss, showed her into the office. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, every surface designed to intimidate. Dante stood at those windows like he had on their wedding night, his back to the door, his posture radiating controlled power. "Lena." He turned, and she saw immediately that the last year had been harder on him than he'd admit. His face had new lines, his eyes looked harder. His smile was practiced rather than natural. "Thank you for coming. Your message said it was urgent, that we needed to discuss foundation business." Lena sat without being invited, claiming space in his domain. "What's so urgent it couldn't be handled through normal donor channels?" Dante moved to his desk, sat, steepled his fingers. "I've been watching your career with interest. Your rise at the foundation has been remarkable. Meteoric, even. Some might say suspicious. Some might say earned through competence and hard work." Lena kept her voice level. "If you have concerns about foundation operations, you're welcome to request a formal audit." "Oh, there will be an audit. Very soon, actually." His smile turned sharp. "Federal auditors, in fact. They've received concerning information about financial irregularities, embezzlement, potential ties to prohibited organizations. When they come, and they will come, they'll find exactly what they're looking for. Will they find it because it exists or because someone planted it?" Lena watched his expression carefully. "I'm not naive, Dante. I know how your world works. I learned from the best." "Did you really think you could build something inside my sphere of influence without consequences? That I'd just watch you succeed while my own reputation crumbled?" Dante leaned forward, his charm evaporating into cold fury. "You were supposed to disappear, Lena. Take the money, leave the city, live quietly somewhere I'd never think about you again. Instead, you built a career that makes me look incompetent by comparison." "I built a career by being good at my job. Your incompetence is your own creation." His hand slammed the desk. "I created you, gave you legitimacy through marriage, gave you money through divorce, gave you the opportunity to restart somewhere safe. You were nothing before me, the daughter of a failed businessman desperate enough to marry a stranger for security. I rescued you from irrelevance. You used me as a prop in your performance for Alejandro Saint Laurent. You married me to prove you could follow protocol, divorced me to prove you could make hard choices. I was never a person to you. I was a demonstration. Lena stood, approached his desk. And when that demonstration succeeded beyond your expectations, you couldn't handle it, because I was supposed to be proof that you could discard people without consequences. Instead, I became proof that you underestimate everyone. Watch yourself, Lena. You're in my office, in my building, surrounded by my people. You think your relationship with Silas Crown protects you. He's next. Once the foundation collapses, once you're both facing federal charges, his reputation will be destroyed right alongside yours. Federal charges based on evidence you planted, evidence Monica documented you planting. Lena pulled out her phone, showed him photographs from the folder Jennifer had provided. She kept records of everything, Dante. Every payment to your IT contractor, every false document you created, every communication with your corrupted federal contact. She's already given testimony. The Justice Department has everything. Dante's face went white, then red. Monica wouldn't dare. She's worked for me for 6 years. She knows what happens to traitors. She knows what happens to women you decide have outlived their usefulness. She watched you do it to me. She didn't want to be next. Lena stepped back, putting distance between them. It's over, Dante. The frame job is exposed. Your corruption is documented. Sarah Chen from the Justice Department is probably getting warrants signed as we speak. You're bluffing. But his voice lacked conviction. Am I? You wanted me to know you were destroying me. You needed me to understand you'd won. That ego is what killed you, Dante. You couldn't just let me disappear. You needed me to know you'd orchestrated my destruction. Lena moved toward the door. Well, now I know, and so does everyone else. Dante stood abruptly, moved around the desk. For a moment, Lena thought he might attack her physically. But Rachel's people were already entering the office, 3 of them moving with professional efficiency. Miss Marlowe, we need to escort you out, the lead operative said smoothly. Sir, I'm afraid you need to stay here. Federal agents are en route. Dante looked between them, reality finally penetrating his denial. This is entrapment. Illegal surveillance. Nothing you recorded will be admissible. Actually, I came here voluntarily to discuss your concerns about the Foundation. What you chose to confess during that discussion is entirely on you. Lena paused at the door. You wanted to know if I could survive your worst, Dante. Now you have your answer. She walked out with Rachel's people flanking her, leaving Dante alone in his expensive office, waiting for the arrest he'd planned for someone else. In the elevator descending, Lena's hands finally started shaking. Adrenaline crash, reaction to the confrontation, relief that it was over. Rachel met her in the lobby, Silas at her side. Federal agents just entered the building. Sarah Chen called personally to confirm the warrants are solid. Dante Rizzo's under arrest within the hour. Silas pulled Lena into his arms, holding her tight enough that she felt grounded again. It's done. You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore. He could never really hurt me, Lena said, pulling back to meet his eyes. The woman he married would have been destroyed by this, but I'm not her anymore. I haven't been for a long time. The next 72 hours were chaos managed by professionals. Federal agents arrested Dante on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, corruption of federal officials, and attempted framing of a charitable organization. The IT contractor flipped immediately, providing additional evidence in exchange for reduced charges. Dante's corrupted federal contact was suspended pending investigation. Veronica Saint Laurent released a statement through her lawyers announcing the end of her engagement, citing irreconcilable differences and significant concerns about judgment and character. Alejandro publicly distanced his organization from Dante's operations. Within a week, Dante's business empire began collapsing as partners fled and allies reconsidered their associations. Jennifer Vasquez published her investigation in a major national outlet, detailing not just Dante's frame attempt but the larger pattern of using charitable organizations for money laundering while corrupting the federal officials meant to oversight them. The story went viral, sparked congressional hearings, resulted in multiple additional investigations. The Meridian Foundation emerged clean. Sarah Chen's team found the planted evidence exactly where Monica had documented, removed it, and verified that the Foundation's actual operations, while operating in gray areas, weren't criminal. Silas worked with federal prosecutors to develop a plan for transitioning the organization toward completely legitimate funding sources over the next 3 years. We'll lose some donors, he told Lena during a late-night strategy session 2 weeks after Dante's arrest. The ones who are using us primarily for laundering will disappear, but we'll gain credibility, attract legitimate philanthropists, build something sustainable rather than constantly vulnerable to compromise. It'll be smaller, Lena observed, reviewing the projections. But it'll be ours, really ours, not dependent on staying in anyone's good graces or turning blind eyes to questionable money. Silas closed his laptop, reached for her hand. We'll build something that can't be destroyed by one person's ego or one exposed corruption. We'll build something that lasts. Lena thought about lasting things, about foundations built on truth rather than convenience. I like that vision. A month after Dante's arrest, Rachel invited Lena to apartment 4F for their regular coffee session. But this time, when Lena arrived, Rachel had someone else there. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that looked strangely familiar. Lena Marlowe, meet Margaret Winters, your grandmother. Rachel's expression was carefully neutral. Lena froze. My grandmother died when my mother was young. That's what your family believed because it was easier than explaining where I actually went. Margaret stood, studied Lena with an intensity that reminded her of looking in a mirror. I was a strategist for one of the largest financial networks on the East Coast. I helped shape markets, influence policy, build empires. I did it quietly, from positions people didn't monitor because they assumed women couldn't hold real power. Why are you here? Lena asked, trying to process this information. Because when Rachel told me about what you'd built from the wreckage of that ridiculous marriage, I recognized myself. The same instincts, the same strategic thinking, the same refusal to stay broken just because someone decided you should be. Margaret smiled, and it transformed her face. I've been watching your career. You have the family gift, the ability to see systems clearly, to understand power dynamics, to operate effectively in spaces between legitimate and questionable. That's not something that can be taught. It's inherited. Rachel poured coffee for all of them. Margaret reached out to me 6 months ago, asking about you. She's been in semi-retirement, but she's ready to come back, work with the foundation, help you build something that honors the best of what our family legacy could be. Lena sat slowly, trying to absorb this. What family legacy? The one where women who are underestimated become invaluable, where we use the invisibility people assign us to build power they don't see coming. Margaret's expression turned serious. Your mother was too gentle for this world. She married your father hoping love would be enough. But you're like me. You understand that survival requires strategy, that changing systems means working within them long enough to understand how to dismantle them. I'm not trying to dismantle anything. I'm just trying to help people. By managing resources through organizations that operate in gray spaces, by building relationships with powerful people and slowly shifting how they think about impact and legacy, by creating models that prove dirty, money can create clean outcomes if managed properly. Margaret leaned forward. That's not just helping people, Lena. That's systemic change through strategic patience. That's exactly what I spent 40 years doing, and I can teach you to do it even better. Lena looked at Rachel, who nodded slightly. She's legitimate. I've verified everything, and she's right. You have instincts most people spend decades developing. Having someone who understands that, who can mentor you through the complexities ahead, that's an opportunity most people never get. The conversation extended through the morning, Margaret sharing stories of operations she'd managed, networks she'd influenced, the careful balance of working within corrupt systems while slowly reforming them from inside. Lena recognized her own approaches in those stories, understood that what she'd thought was adaptation was actually inheritance. Take time to think about it, Margaret said as she was leaving, but know that family looks different in our world. It's not blood or obligation, it's recognition of shared gifts and shared purpose. I see both in you. I'd be honored to work alongside you. After she left, Lena stood at Rachel's window looking out at the city that had almost destroyed her but instead became the foundation of her transformation. Is this real? My grandmother, strategic genius, offering to mentor me and changing the world through morally complex philanthropy? As real as everything else you've survived and built. Rachel joined her at the window. You get to choose, Lena. Just like you've chosen everything since Dante tried to make you disappear. Choose based on what serves your vision, not what others expect. The choice felt easier than it should. Lena called Margaret that evening, accepted the offer. Within 2 weeks, Margaret was working with the foundation as a senior strategic advisor, bringing connections and expertise that accelerated Silas's reform vision. 3 months after Dante's arrest, Lena and Silas hosted a small gathering at the foundation to celebrate their 1-year anniversary as partners, both professional and personal. The guest list was carefully curated: Rachel, Margaret, key foundation staff, donors who'd supported their transition toward legitimacy, community leaders whose programs had been funded. No press, no performance, just genuine celebration of what they'd built. Silas raised a glass for a toast. A year ago, I was running an organization that did some good while enabling a lot of questionable activity. I thought that balance was the best possible outcome, that you couldn't create real change without compromising with power. Then Lena walked through our doors and proved me wrong. She showed me that strategic patience and uncompromising values aren't contradictory, they're complementary. That the best way to reform corrupt systems is to build something so effective within them that the corruption becomes unnecessary. He turned to Lena, his expression open and genuine. You came here with nothing except intelligence, resilience, and a refusal to accept the narrative someone else had written for you. In 12 months, you've transformed this organization, helped dozens of families build better futures, and shown me what partnership actually looks like. I'm a better person and a better leader because you chose to build this with me. Thank you. The room erupted in applause. Lena felt emotion tighten her throat. Gratitude for these people who'd helped her become who she needed to be. Pride in what they'd accomplished together. Hope for what they'd continue building. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Lena and Silas walked along the river that bordered the historic district. The night was cool, autumn settling into the city with gold leaves and crisp air. I never thanked you properly, Lena said, her hand in his, for taking a chance on someone with no credentials except a referral from Rachel, for trusting me with real responsibility instead of just giving me a sympathy job. I didn't give you anything. You earned everything through competence and vision. Silas stopped walking, turned to face her. But I'm grateful you chose this path, chose to stay in the city instead of disappearing like Dante wanted, chose to build something meaningful instead of just surviving, chose me when you could have chosen safety and distance. You made the choice easy. You treated me like a partner from day one, never like a project or a possession. Lena reached up, touched his face. After Dante, I didn't think I'd ever trust someone with power over me again. But you taught me that power doesn't have to be wielded against people. It can be shared with them. I learned that from you, Silas said quietly, watching you build influence through service instead of intimidation, through competence instead of manipulation. You taught me what leadership looks like when it's not driven by ego. He kissed her then, gentle and deep, a confirmation of partnership that had evolved into something more profound. When they finally separated, Lena felt centered in a way she hadn't since before her father's business collapsed, like she finally knew who she was and where she belonged. What happens next? She asked. We've stabilized the foundation, transitioned toward legitimate funding, built real impact. What's our next goal? Expansion, replication. Taking what we've learned here and building similar models in other cities. Silas's eyes lit up with vision. Margaret thinks we could develop a network, independent foundations operating on the same principles, supporting each other, creating systemic change through coordinated action. It would take years, require enormous resources and energy, but it would matter. It would terrify a lot of powerful people, Lena observed. Good. Powerful people should be terrified of losing control to models that actually serve communities instead of exploiting them. Silas smiled. Besides, we've already taken down one powerful person who tried to destroy us. I think we can handle the next challenge. They walked back toward the foundation building, discussing possibilities and plans, building their shared future one conversation at a time. Inside, the lights were still on, staff working late on grant applications, programs that would change lives, strategic initiatives that would shift how resources flowed through their community. A year ago, Lena had stood in a staged apartment believing her life was over, that being discarded by Dante Rizzo meant becoming irrelevant and invisible. Now she understood that invisibility had been a gift, a chance to rebuild herself without the weight of others' expectations, to discover capabilities she'd never known she possessed, to become formidable in ways Dante had never imagined possible. 6 months later, Dante's trial concluded with convictions on multiple counts. He received 8 years in federal prison, forfeiture of assets, permanent damage to his reputation that would follow him long after release. Veronica married a French diplomat, relocating to Europe and leaving Dante's world behind entirely. His former empire was parceled out among rivals who'd been waiting for his collapse. Lena didn't attend the trial. By then, Dante represented such a small part of her story that following his downfall felt unnecessary. She was too busy building the network Silas had envisioned. Foundations in 3 cities already operational, plans for 5 more in development, a model of strategic philanthropy that was attracting attention from reformers nationwide. On what would have been their 2nd wedding anniversary, if the marriage had lasted longer than 6 hours, Lena stood in a community center the foundation had funded, watching teenagers receive scholarships that would transform their futures. She thought briefly about the bride who'd signed divorce papers in exile, who'd believed she was powerless because someone had decided she was disposable. That bride had been wrong about so many things. Power didn't come from who you married or what position you held. It came from understanding systems, building relationships, creating value that others couldn't ignore. It came from choosing to stand up after being knocked down, from learning instead of breaking, from building instead of hiding. Silas joined her at the back of the room, his arm around her waist. Thinking about what could have been. Thinking about what is, and what's still becoming. Lena leaned into him. Dante thought he was teaching me a lesson when he threw me away. He was just not the lesson he intended. What did you learn? That the people who underestimate you give you the greatest advantage. That being dismissed creates opportunities for those smart enough to recognize them. That survival isn't enough. Transformation is what matters. Lena watched a young woman accept her scholarship, tears streaming down her face, her mother beside her celebrating. He wanted me to disappear. Instead, I became unforgettable. That evening, Lena returned to the apartment building where everything had changed. Not to apartment 4A, where she'd spent those first isolated months, but to a penthouse she and Silas had purchased together, the place where they'd build their shared future. The building was different now, too. Rachel had sold it to a collective that converted it into affordable housing for families transitioning out of crisis. Everything transformed if you gave it enough time and strategic effort. In the penthouse, surrounded by the life she'd built through choice rather than circumstance, Lena poured wine and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread before her like it had that first night in Dante's penthouse, but the view meant something different now. Then it had represented distance, separation from any possible escape. Now it represented possibility, connection, the vast network of lives she could touch through the work she'd chosen. Her phone buzzed, a message from Margaret. Board approved the Chicago expansion. You were right about the funding model. This family legacy might actually change the world. Lena smiled, typed back. One foundation at a time. One community at a time. Strategic patience, remember? You learned well. Your grandmother is proud. She set down the phone, raised her glass toward the city. A silent toast to the woman she'd been, frightened, discarded, invisible, and to the woman she'd become, powerful, strategic, building an empire that mattered not because it dominated, but because it served. Dante had taught her that people were either assets or liabilities. He'd decided she was neither, too insignificant to matter either way. In doing so, he'd given her the freedom to become something he'd never anticipated. Someone who measured worth differently, who built power through service rather than domination, who understood that the most dangerous people were the ones you decided not to fear. The woman discarded on her wedding night had done more than survive. She'd transformed, evolved, become someone who changed systems from the inside by refusing to accept that corruption was inevitable or that power required cruelty. She'd become exactly who she needed to be. Not despite what Dante had done to her, but because of it. Because being broken open gave you the choice to rebuild yourself into something stronger than you'd been before. And that choice, that moment of deciding who to become after the world tried to destroy you, that was the real power. The only power that mattered. Lena stood at her window, the city glittering below, the future spreading before her like light made of possibility. She'd started this journey believing she needed someone to save her. She'd ended it, understanding that salvation came from within, that rescue was something you did for yourself. The best revenge, she'd learned, wasn't destruction. It was becoming so successful, so essential, so transformative, that the person who'd tried to erase you had to live knowing they'd created their own worst enemy by underestimating your capacity to rise. Dante Rizzo would spend years in prison, thinking about that mistake. Meanwhile, Lena Marlowe would spend those years building an empire of compassion, strategy, and sustainable change, proving every day that the woman he'd discarded as worthless had become priceless to everyone who was smart enough to recognize her value. That was justice. That was victory. That was the ending she'd written for herself when she stopped accepting the narrative others tried to impose. And it was only the beginning of what she'd become.